This is the new 2025 Porsche 911 GTS T-Hybrid, and right there in the name, you know this is gonna be a big one, a hybrid Porsche 911. First they went turbo, now they're going hybrid. The 911 has come a long way from the old analog little sports car that everyone loves. Today I'm going to review the new hybrid Porsche 911 and show you all of its quirks and features, and we'll find out if it still has the Porsche 911 magic. If you've been watching my videos for a long time, you'll remember I used to take my cars to CarMax to see what they'd offer me as a trade-in value. These videos were fun and popular as they would often give me a wildly inaccurate number for the cars. Submit your cool car to Cars and Bids in just a few minutes, and you'll be connected with an auction manager from my team who will help your car go live on Cars and Bids, where you'll get way more money for your car than trading it in to a big box dealer. Look at how much these cars sold for on Cars and Bids compared to their trade-in value. Here's a trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Here's a trade-in value and the Cars and Bids result, and this was a trade-in value and this was the Cars and Bids result. Get started now and sell your car on carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of this new 911, the updated 992, the 992.2. Now, the big news for this car is obviously, like I mentioned, the new hybrid powertrain. And actually, I've already reviewed the 992.2 Carrera T, but that car doesn't have the hybrid powertrain. This is the GTS with the new T-Hybrid engine, and it's a big deal. The first hybrid 911. So here's the deal. The gasoline-powered engine in this car is a completely new turbocharged 3.6-liter flat six that makes about 480 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. The electric component adds 53 horsepower and 110 pound-feet of torque, and when you combine them, you can't just add those numbers because they sort of appear at different parts of the power band. The result is about 535 horsepower and roughly 450 pound-feet of torque, which is big, huge numbers. In fact, it's 60 more horsepower than the outgoing 911 GTS, the 992.1, and another 30 pound-feet of torque, and it results in a 0 to 60 time for this car of 2.9 seconds, under 3 seconds for just the GTS, not even the top-of-the-line turbo or GT3 RS. Pretty impressive. Now, unlike some hybrid cars, probably the hybrid cars you're thinking of, like the Toyota Prius, the hybrid system in this car is actually not incredibly significant to the entire powertrain, drivetrain component of this car. I'm not going to get too technical here, but the basic deal is there's an electric motor between the engine and transmission in this car, and there's an electric motor that drives the turbocharger, and it all uses a fairly small battery and adds a fairly insignificant amount of weight. Porsche says all the hybrid stuff only adds about 110 pounds of weight to this car. That brings the total carb weight to around 3,500, 3,550 pounds, somewhere right in there. It's important to mention this car does not have a fully electric driving mode like some hybrid cars do, and it is not a plug-in hybrid. You don't plug it in and you go fully electric for a while. It's none of that stuff. It's just a regular little hybrid system, but mostly you operate it like a gasoline-powered car. Now, three other interesting things about the hybrid system in this car, and then I'll move on to the general quirks and features. Number one, there's no blow-off valve in this car. Other turbocharged cars have a blow-off valve, but this car, they use the exhaust gases to help bring more power to the hybrid system, which is interesting. Another interesting thing, this is not twin turbocharged like basically all other Porsche turbo models have been for the last 30 years. There's just a single turbo because using the electric motor for the turbocharger means there's no turbo lag. It's instant boost, so they didn't have to do a low pressure and a high pressure turbo to solve the turbo lag problem. The other interesting thing is that this car is now only available with the 8-speed PDK dual clutch automatic transmission. You can't get the hybrid with the manual, which is, in my opinion, probably the biggest drawback of the hybrid, at least on paper. We'll see how it drives shortly. But let's first talk quirks and features, starting with Well, the engine. Why am I sitting back here with this flap up? When you open this flap, you don't actually access the engine, as you can see. Instead, you open it up, and back here there's a couple of fans, a little plastic cover, and then two caps where you can add oil over on one side and coolant over on the other. You can't actually access the engine in your Porsche 911, which I think is so crazy, but that's how they do it. Now, this is the flap open. Now, the outside of the new 992.2 frankly looks a lot like the outside of the 992.1, with only a few minor changes for really obsessed Porsche people to be able to tell them apart. The most obvious change is up front, where you have this new grille design with these vertical slats off to the side. That is definitely distinctive and noticeable compared to earlier 992 models, but aside from that, there's not really all that much major to distinguish this car from the previous 992. You still have a lot of the same distinctive stuff, including the odd vertical third brake light mounted right here on top of the flap. When you push the brakes, that turns on. It's weird. These are usually horizontal. Both 992 models have that. This car also still has the giant rear light bar, this large horizontal light bar that goes across the entire rear end, and with the headlights on, the whole rear is lit up, which frankly is actually a pretty cool effect. I like how that looks. It's distinctive, it's neat, and below it you can see Porsche is integrated, the script, into the light housing kind of between the left and right turn signals below that light bar and back, which is all a pretty cool setup. Now, speaking of lighting, there's also another cool effect, and that's up front, where you have the Porsche script integrated into the headlight housing, but it's facing to the side. This isn't actually useful for headlight illumination. It's just there to look cool, I presume, but look cool it does. You turn on the car and Porsche lights up in the headlights so everybody knows, just in case they didn't before. Next up, we move back to the rear of the car, where you can see dual exhaust. That is carried over from the previous GTS, which also had dual exhaust. And this car has the sport exhaust that opens things up, makes it sound especially good. Take a listen. And next up, another interesting exterior quirk is the door handle. You can see when the car is locked, the door handle is sort of pushed into the body, but when you unlock the car, the door handle pops out, and then you can walk up, slide your fingers under, and open the door and climb inside. And speaking of the doors, one rather distinctive touch of this car, you can see at the bottom of the door, there is a badge here that says T-Hybrid, which announces to everyone that you're driving the new Hybrid 911. Obviously, this is also a distinctive touch compared to previous 911 models. And speaking of changes, also worth pointing out, Porsche mentioned to me that rear axle steering is now standard on the 911 GTS, whereas it had been optional before, and this new 992.2 GTS has larger brakes than previous GTS models. Though you do still have center lock wheels, which has always been kind of a hallmark of the GTS. A bit of overkill on a road car like this. That's usually race car stuff, but it is cool to see, and it's a nice little touch to distinguish the GTS from the lesser 911s. And next we move inside, where there are many more quirks in the newest 911. How about we start with the key, which you can see is intended to be in sort of the overall shape of a 911, kind of cool. And the coolest part is that when you press a button on the key, a little light turns on around the Porsche crest, I guess confirming that it has received your input, and then it will lock the doors or unlock or whatever you press. Now, you climb inside, and the first thing you notice in here is that this interior is still more functional than beautiful. That has always been true of 911 models, and that is still true in this one. You don't have a lot of swoopy lines and sort of beautiful, cool, exciting designs. Instead, a pretty upright dashboard, all the stuff you need sort of right in your field of vision and within reach of the driver. It's all very focused and Porsche-like, functional, German, not necessarily beautiful and cool and edgy and exciting, but it's practical for a sports car, and it's how 911 interiors have been for a long long time, and you can easily see the lineage between older 911s and this one. It's the same basic design, just kind of modernized. With that said, there are some rather unusual and interesting quirks in here. For example, all of the switches have the same basic shape to them, which is they sort of stick out like a switch should, and then the edge is textured, as you can see these switches here on the center control stack for the hazard lights, traction control off, etc. You move down, same basic switches for the climate control vents to move them up, down, left, right, pretty simple, but then you also have that same switch design for the gear selector, which is kind of odd. It's almost like they've reduced the gear selector to just another thing you're turning on or off or moving like a climate vent, except this one puts you in drive and makes you go. It's certainly an unusual gear lever. It's also a little bit unusual in here that the drive mode dial comes off the steering wheel. You can see it has its own like separate part that hangs off the wheel, and you can twist the drive mode dial to go into the various different drive modes. The weird part though is in the center it's bright red, which seems a little strange. This is not your engine start stop button. Instead, it is a power boost button. If you press this, you get like a little shot of extra power for 20 seconds so that you can execute like a quick highway pass or a racetrack pass or whatever you need 20 seconds of power for. That's the red button in the center of drive mode, which is actually pretty cool. Also unusual in this interior is the detachable cup holder situation. You look in this center console and you can see a cup holder in here. Makes sense, no surprise. But this cup holder can be removed. You can press this tab at the top, take it out, it's gone, and you can replace it with a little storage panel that they also give you when you buy one of these cars. This little storage compartment also fits in here, or if you'd prefer the cup holder, you can put that back. You have to choose between the cup holder and the storage compartment, but they're detachable, removable, and exchangeable at any time, which is a little odd. Also a little odd in this particular car is there's no back seats. You look back there and you can see there's kind of the makings of where the back seats ought to be. You can see the spot where they belong, but this car doesn't have them. No seat belts, no actual seat backrests or bottoms, no back seats in this car. That's unusual for a 911 GTS, which is not intended to be as sporty as a GT3 or a GT3 RS, where you might more frequently see it without back seats. Now, back seats are optional. This car doesn't come without back seats. You can choose to add them back if you wish, and I suspect that if you get one of these, you will choose to add the back seats back in, because that's sort of the normal default, and frankly, without the back seats, the space is just totally unused, although with the back seats, it's not really all that usable either, but hey, at least the seats add a little practicality. Now, speaking of the seats, worth pointing out that the front seats in this car, or the only seats in this one, are sort of sporty sport seats. They're pretty heavily bolstered, and they have manual functions. They don't, for instance, go forward or backward automatically. You gotta pull a lever and then throw your weight forward, which again seems a little odd on a car like this, which is more luxurious than a GT3, where you normally see those manually operated sport seats. Still, that's what this has, and you can option a more traditional, luxurious power seat if you don't want these sportier seats. And next up, we move on to the technology in this car, specifically the main infotainment screen in the center control stack, which frankly works pretty well. It's intuitive, it's easy to figure out. The screen is about the right size for a car like this. No giant Tesla screen. That's not what you want in a sports car. It works. It's the right size, it's intuitive, it's easy to use. Now, basically everybody these days uses Apple CarPlay or Android Auto in this center screen, and so going through all the functions is not really as important as it once was, but if you don't use those features, it is a good, easy, usable infotainment system, and it does not take the climate controls with it. Instead, your climate controls are located down below the center screen next to the gear selector in the center control stack. It's not all of the climate controls. There's still some stuff you can do in the screen, but your basics like temperature control, fan speed, those are down below, and that's where you make those adjustments. More importantly, in the world of screens for this car, the gauge cluster screen, which everybody will use since you can't Apple CarPlay your way out of the gauge cluster screen. The gauge screen in this car is fantastic. It is tremendously easy to use with all sorts of different functionality and information displays that you can configure depending on exactly what you want to see, which is just wonderful. You can have a full screen map here. You can have the map with your music. You can have various vehicle information data display screens all sorts of different stuff visible and capable of being shown in this screen, and all easily changeable with simple steering wheel buttons, as opposed to going into menus and trying to figure out what each setting is for, like in so many of these screens when you're trying to adjust them. This is a really great gauge screen, among the very best in the business. And to make that work, Porsche had to ditch the old school central dial, the old analog tachometer that they used for a long time. This probably upsets purists, not having that central tachometer in the middle, but it makes for a much better user experience for this gauge cluster and all the technology around it. It really improves the tech in this car, and the result, I think, is one of the best gauge screen interfaces in the entire car business, which actually makes sense in Porsche, since you want to get a lot of good information right in your line of sight for your racetrack driving. It's nice to have exactly that. And next up, we move on to the cargo area, which is, of course, up front in a 911, and you can see it's quite large. Just like it always has been in 911s, actually a pretty decent-sized cargo area where you can store a decent-sized amount of cargo. Also located in the cargo area, as you can see, this little button, which is marked exit and finished in a glow-in-the-dark color, so that if you happen to get stuck in the trunk or kidnapped by someone with a 911 GTS, you press that button and then you can climb out. Although that may be a little dangerous, since you're in front, you'd be opening the trunk and they're driving. It's not great to think about, but regardless, it's possible to escape from this trunk. Now, the final thing before we drive this car, let's talk pricing. This particular car, the Carrera 4 GTS, starts at around $175,000 with shipping, and this particular one is equipped to around $206,000. That's the sticker price of this car. Now, this one includes some options that I suspect most people won't get, including carbon ceramic brakes. It costs a little over $10,000 extra, but still, it's pretty crazy to see a 2 in front of the price tag of a new 911 that isn't a turbo or a GT car, instead just a GTS. This is a pretty impressive car, but that's a pretty impressive price tag. Now, it is worth pointing out that if you don't want to get the Carrera 4 GTS, the all-wheel drive model like this car, you can also just get a regular two-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive GTS and save about $9,000. So this is kind of the top of the top. The all-wheel drive one with some extra options, that's where you get to the price tag. Still, these are expensive cars. But we knew the 911 was expensive. What we don't know is how the new hybrid version drives. That's the thing I'm most interested in with this car, so let's get it out on the road and find out. All right, driving the new 992 GTS Hybrid. It's a little rainy today, so I can't really go as hard as I would want to, but I have been driving this car around now for the whole week, and I gotta tell you, I'm astonished by this car, and specifically I'm astonished by the fact that we have all made such a big deal about the hybrid thing. The truth is, there's no way to even tell. You know, when people say hybrid, they think of a Prius, which is a very boring, even the newest version, like a very boring, very slow, like way pushing towards efficiency instead of a driving enjoyment kind of car. And that's what, when you think hybrid, that's what you think of. But the LaFerrari is a hybrid, the 918 Spider is a hybrid, the new M5 is a hybrid, and this is a hybrid, and you know what? It drives wonderfully. And actually, I gotta say, my first moments in this car a few days ago, when I'm driving around, I think to myself, this is what everybody made a big fuss about. It's a hybrid, and it's called a hybrid, and it's a hybrid, etc. It doesn't feel like a hybrid. It doesn't drive like a hybrid. If Porsche hadn't told us that this was a hybrid, I don't think a lot of the people who are complaining that it's a hybrid would even be aware that it's a hybrid. Now, that doesn't really surprise me all that much, because Porsche knows the formula for making a good, successful, well-received 911, and they were never gonna let a hybrid powertrain ruin that. So I'm not surprised it drives well, it drives like a 911. I'll talk more about that in a minute. The thing that does surprise me is that I actually actually feel that this car drives a little bit more analog than the turbo non-hybrid cars of the previous generation, the 992.1 and the 991.2. There's a little bit more like effort required to kind of push the pedal. I feel like in the old cars, the turbocharger kind of gave it sort of an artificial feel of power, which is fine, that's how turbos work sort of, but in this car, which is also turbocharged, it feels more like an old school 911 where you're interacting with the mechanicalness of the machine a little bit more. And I'm pushing the pedal, I'm getting the same response, but I don't have that sort of turbo kind of filling in some gap. I don't really know how to describe it other than there's a little bit more of a feeling of analogness to the actual pedal feel of the car and the acceleration feel of the car. But doing the research on the hybrid system, I was surprised at how relatively mild it is. This isn't like a Prius where the hybrid system totally takes over. It's only for a couple of relatively unimportant parts of the experience. It's not like the entire thing. So it doesn't dominate the driving experience in any way. Regardless, it absolutely, unquestionably still feels like a 911, and it absolutely, unquestionably does not feel like any sort of, well, obviously any sort of Toyota Prius, but it doesn't feel like any sort of, hybrid. So beyond my feelings on the hybrid system, moving on to the rest of the car, it's a 911. It drives like a 911. And that is to say, for the newest 911 models, that is to say, a little larger than I would want, a little more luxurious than I would want. Like this isn't the old days of the 911, where it just felt a little bit more tossable and analog and fun. However, it is still an incredibly competent car, and every time I get into a 911, I'm astonished by the fact that they make it drive so incredibly well, considering how much more size and weight and luxury they continue to add with each successive generation. Now, while I may complain a little that the 911 has gotten big, et cetera, I will say, this car delivers exactly what people are looking for who are looking for this car, which is this combination of luxury and performance. And I actually think that is dialed in particularly well in the GTS models. The GT3s and the GT3 Tourings, et cetera, the RS, they have their purpose, but they're niche, if we're being honest. And the regular base model is cool, but when you think about the level of fast that people want when they're spending this much money and getting a Porsche 911, it's not quite necessarily on that level. This car plays kind of the perfect role with all of the cool Porsche gadgets, rear wheel steering and sport chrono and PASM sport suspension, all that stuff, while not going too far like a GT3. When you think about the bell curve, the meaty part of the bell curve of Porsche owners, this car provides kind of the perfect balance of comfort, of performance, of drivability, and I don't think the hybrid system hampers things at all. And I still think that this car is an exceptionally excellent driver that a lot of people are going to have their greatest Porsche memories in, because it really just does everything so wonderfully well. And I think the hybrid system doesn't take away from that at all. And really, it's still a pretty impressive all-around car. And so that's the new 2025 Porsche 911 GTS T-Hybrid. I know, a hybrid 911 seems like sacrilege, but Porsche doesn't mess with the 911 lightly. Every major change to this iconic car is carefully considered, from going water-cooled in the 1990s all the way through to this. And this car still has the magic, the excitement that makes a 911 a 911. And now it's time to give this hybrid Porsche 911 a DOUGSCORE. And the DOUGSCORE is here, 67 out of 100, which puts the 911 GTS T-Hybrid here against similar cars. Probably the best comparison point here is the 911 Carrera T, which is also the new 992.2 model, and the GTS actually ends up below it despite being the more expensive car. That's mainly because the T is so enjoyable and so much more affordable than the GTS, which has really become pricey in the newest 911 generation. I love this new 911 GTS, but over $200,000 is a tough ask when the Carrera T does things so well and when a certified pre-owned turbo is at the same price point. Still, the new GTS is an excellent performer and the hybrid powertrain is an excellent addition.